So there's just so many images in the world now. That's all. It's just flooded, and you have to wonder where it's all going. Where is this all going? Just nazar lil ma'alat. Where is it all going? The internet's just filled with endless images of everything, and the image is losing its meaning. And I would recommend reading Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, especially the second chapter in that book, which is about image-based societies. And one of the things that he reflects on in that book is why God would make it a prohibition to make graven images in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments. Why would making graven images be a prohibition? And he argues that any society that is going to be a society of abstraction and imagination, then the worst thing for a society like that is to produce images. It would be the worst thing. And so if you want to have an abstraction, because God is a complete abstraction, you cannot imagine God. And so if you want to inculcate in a people the ability to have the highest abstractions, then the preference for that would be not to have images. And so the early Muslims were very, very strong about that. And the iconoclastic movement in the Orthodox Church, which was centered here, because of their interaction with the Muslims and that seriousness with which they took that prohibition of taswir, of graven images, the Christians started destroying all of their icons. And it's interesting that the only icons that we have from that period are the ones that were in monasteries that were in the Muslim lands, because they were protected from these fanatical iconoclasts who were going around into all the churches and destroying all the images of the Greek Orthodox icons during that period. But that response was a response from interacting with Muslims, and you can see this also during the Protestant period, where they went and smashed all the idols in the Catholic churches, or the images rather. So I'm not saying don't take pictures. People can do that. I'm just saying there's times when it might be useful to think about putting the camera down and just experiencing something, not necessarily through a mediated reality. And that's partly why there's a photographer here doing this, to do that. That's why they brought him here, so that there would be images and things like that from this. So that's just, that's my own peevish perspective about this thing. Food for thought. That's all. So he deals with the eye at the end of this poem, but we're dealing with the tongue now. So he says كذا حكاية مقارناتك في جنب الأنبياء بغير لائق. This is on the prohibition of saying anything that has been said about any of the prophets that is not غير لائق, that is not appropriate and shouldn't be said about them. This includes cursing them, and you will find statements made, obviously in the Old Testament, you'll find statements made about certain prophets that are completely unacceptable from a Muslim perspective. The idea that a prophet would send a man into battle to be killed so that he could covet his wife. Even an average person wouldn't do that, let alone one of the best of God's creation. Or the idea that a prophet could sleep with his daughters, or all of these things are mentioned, and it's prohibited to talk about these things unless it was in a teaching situation to warn people, even if it's mentioned in the Quran, and he'll mention that about Adam alayhi salam. So he says, مَا لَمْ يَسُوقُ غَرَضٌ شَرْعِي. So if there's a غَرَضٌ شَرْعِيُّ, if there's a sharia reason for doing it, لَهُ كَأَنْ يَحْضَرَهُ غَبِيُّ. So for instance, so that somebody who's not very intelligent can avoid it, the ghabi. Somebody who's, might not realize how serious that is, so you have to tell somebody like that to warn them. كذاك أن يقول في غير تلاوة عصى آدم ربه أعلى. So also to say in other than recitation. There's a verse in the Quran that says that Adam disobeyed his Lord, and he says in the commentary, he says, you shouldn't ever say that about your own father, let alone the father of humanity. But because it's in the Quran and Allah says that, and it doesn't mean isyan, disobedience in the sense of a willful disobedience according to the dominant opinion of the scholars. So that's very important, because there's a lot of things, and he'll talk about later in the text, he will talk about interpreting the Quran from your opinion or what it appears linguistically to mean. So in the Quran there are many things that the apparent linguistic meaning of it is actually different from the actual meaning of it. And if you just interpret that, it says that Asa Adam. So if you just take that purely linguistically, it means one thing, but you have to understand what the commentary is, and this is why the ulama prohibit it, and he'll get into that. So he's saying other than in tilawa, you should not do that. وَذِكْرُ أَنْ لَقَى نَبِيٌّ كَدَرًا مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ رَاوِيًا أَوْ مُذَاكِرًا. Or to talk about the things that happen to the prophets in the world, again, as long as you're not relating it as a riwayah or about telling it as some the mudhakara of the ulama who know about these things. And so it's important, there's things that are mentioned in the hadith and in the Quran that happen to prophets, and it's inappropriate to talk about those things unless there's a reason to do that. Famous story of Musa alayhi salam, when his clothes were stolen from him, things like that. If there's not a reason for doing it, then just to talk about something like that is not acceptable. And he says, لِلْعُلَمَا وَنَحْوِهِمْ مِمَّنْ لَا يَخَافُ أَنْ يَسْمَعُهُ أَنْ يَضِلَّ إِنْ يَسْمَعُهُ أَنْ يَضِلَّ. So this is, the ulama can do this, or the students, their students, those who, if they hear it, they won't go astray because of it. So there's things that you can hear that could lead a person astray. And one of the things about seerah is very important to remember, that seerah, the early seerah, especially Ibn Ishaq seerah is the weakest form of narration in Islamic tradition. Like the history, akhbar and seerah, these are very weak forms of narrative, unless they have a sanad, muttasil. And the early ulama collected everything, because they're called Asr al-Tadween. They were the period where they were just gathering everything. And this is why the hadith, they gathered all the hadith. They put them in these collections. And then they left it for the next generation to begin to sort them out. So you will find there are seerah for average people to read, that you can read. But then there are seerah that only the scholars should read. If you read Ibn Ishaq, there's things in there that can lead you astray. And one of the things that people that are against Islam do is they take these old seerah books and they put stories and they say, oh look, here, this is Islam. And there's Muslims getting confused by this. So this is what he's warning about, that you can't relate these stories unless you're a scholar or a student of a scholar, and you understand that not all of these things are accurate. And the early ulama were very honest in their collection of all these things. But this is not normative Islam. Normative Islam comes later, where everything is sorted out. And this happens in fiqh. So you will have fiqh positions that are completely insane in some of the early period. You'll find these in the books because they just collected them and they put them in the books. But they're not the positions that the schools take. So if I take a position out of context and say, oh, here, this is what the Maliki say. No, that's what one Maliki said, and they call it hafwa or zalla. It's a mistake. And the hafwat al-ulama, the zallat al-ulama are the worst. إِذَا زَلَّ الْعَالِمْ زَلَّتَ الْعَالَمْ. You know, the ulama say, if the scholar trips, the whole world trips with him. You know, that his trip is very dangerous because other people are looking at it. So he's warning about that it's very important. وَذِكْرُ مَا بَيْنَ الصَّحَابَةِ شَجَرٍ إِلَّا مُبَيِّنًا أَنَّهُمْ عَلَى بَصَرٍ. So this is also important, mentioning what happened between the Sahaba, unless you're clarifying that each one of them was a mujtahid. So again, you have narratives in the early period, and you will find a lot of difference of opinion about what happened, for instance, between Muawiyah radiallahu anhu and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. And the certain groups in Islam took certain positions. The Sunni position is a position of husn al-dhan. It's a position of having a good opinion of people, and that these people were companions, and what was in their heart was good. It wasn't bad. And one of the things about that early period that you see is that they were human beings, and they did go to blows, and they did fall into, just like families do. Even people that love each other can end up doing terrible things to each other, right? I mean, this is part of the human condition. So it's making sure that if you speak about these things, and common people shouldn't discuss these things, because this is a dangerous thing to go into that. And he's warning about that, talking about if you're unqualified to do that, you should not be doing it, because it can be very dangerous. And then he says, and then he says, لحن القرآن والحديث حدر. So this is a very problematic aspect of the maharam al-lisan, because basically what he's saying is a lahan is there's two types of lahan. There's called lahan khafi, and there's lahan jali. A lahan jali is overtly or egregiously wrong grammar. So for instance, Imam Zayd tells about the khatib who was giving the khutbah, and he said, you know, that corruption has, there's a hadith, there's a verse in the Quran, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر, that corruption has manifest in the earth and on the ocean. And the man said, في البر والبحر. In other words, he made what should have been majrur, he made it marfu'. It should have been in the genitive case, and he put it in the nominative case. And so one of the people in the masjid said, وَعَلَى الْمِنْبَرُ. And the fasad, this corruption, is also on the minbar, right? So the ulama, Imam al-Hilali says that lahan in the Quran and in the hadith is actually a kabira. So that's how severe some of the ulama considered it, that it was a kabira. Now part of that is to prevent people who are not capable and this is one of the things Dr. Winter said, that giving a khutbah, if you have to give a khutbah in Arabic, and one of the Umayyad caliphs said that شَيَّبَتْنِي تَوَقَّعُ اللَّحْنَ عَلَى الْمِنْبَرِ, I got gray hairs out of fear of lahn on the minbar. You know, it gave him gray hairs, worrying, because if you speak in front of people and there's scholars in the audience and there's people that know grammar, and you start making grammatical mistakes. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu was asked how you know a man, and if he said إِذَا تَكَلَّمَ عَرَفْتُهُ مِنْ سَاعَتِهِ. If he speaks, I'll know him immediately. وَإِذَا سَكَتَ أَعْرَفُهُ بَعْدَ يَوْمٍ. And if he doesn't speak, it'll take me a day to figure out what kind of a person he is, right? But the Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said, الناس أسواق فإذا تكلم الرجل تبين العطار من البيطار. That people are like marketplaces, a lot of different types in the marketplace. And he said, if a man speaks, it becomes clear who the Attar is the perfumer or the physician, because in Arabic, Attar means perfumer and it means physician. It becomes clear who the physician is and who the veterinarian is, who treats animals and who treats. الْمَرْءُ مَخْبُوءٌ تَحْتَ لِسَانِهِ. A man lies hidden under his tongue. وَلَا تَعْرِفَنَّهُمْ فِي لَحْنَ الْقَوْلِ. You know, Allah says you will know them in the لَحْنَ الْقَوْلِ. Like you will know them in the hidden meanings of their words. Because people have ostensible meanings and then they have their real meanings. And you will know them in those hidden meanings. So this is what he's saying. Now in the Quran, tajweed is an obligation to learn tajweed, right? Imam al-Jazari says, وَالْأَخْذُ بِالتَّجْوِيدِ حَتْمٌ لَازِمُ مَنْ لَمْ يُجَوِّدَ الْقُرْآنَ آثِمُ. That to learn tajweed is absolutely necessary, and the one that doesn't have tajweed is athimu, is sinful. And this is agreed upon, that if you recite the Quran without tajweed, and the ulama say with the Quran it's khafi and jali, that the lahn al-khafi and lahn al-jali are the same in the sinfulness of it. So the jali mistake would be something where you miss, the i'rab is wrong, or the sarf is wrong. So you make a, you know, in Arabic you have verbs have different haraka in the past and in the present and future. And even a lot of scholars make mistakes on those harakat because that's one of the hardest aspects of vocabulary, is the verb differences. So a lahan in sarf, but sometimes you think it's wrong and then it turns out that it's a, I mean, subhanAllah, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah, whenever he speaks, he'll say something like khadama yakhdumu, you know, that's the way I learned it, but he said khadama yakhdimu, you know, and I heard him say that. And always when he says something, like he's a hujjah in lugha, if he says it, you know, when he's speaking Arabic, I guarantee you it's a hujjah. And that's rare in this age, to find scholars that are actually like a marja' in lugha. They're a reference point in lugha. But that's one of the things. So you can have like khadama yakhdumu and khadama yakhdimu. They can both. So the lahan would be to say khadama yakhdamu, right? Like that or something like that. So you can have a grammatical mistake, or in your i'rab in the Quran, if you make something that should be in the accusative, in the nominative, or you make it in the genitive and put it in the accusative, those are all called lahan jali. They're egregious grammatical mistakes. And anybody that knows grammar and sarf will recognize them immediately. If you see somebody who but with the khafi, this is a matter of people that if they're trained in tajweed, and then you can be trained in tajweed but not be, like he says in the thing, Imam al-Jazari, he says that إلا رياضة امرئ بفكه وما بين هذا وبين تركه إلا رياضة امرئ بفكه. You know, that the only difference between somebody who can do tajweed and the one who doesn't is the practice of the jaw. Like you actually have to practice tajweed. So you can learn the ahkam. Many North African, when I was younger and when I first went to Morocco, you heard a lot of the ulama reciting Quran incorrectly in Morocco. It was very common.